What if one ordinary winter afternoon, in the heart of your neighborhood, a tidal wave came crashing down the street, but instead of water, it was thick, dark, suffocating molasses? What if a sweet smell filled the air, only to be followed by chaos, destruction, and death? This isn't the beginning of a strange, tall tale. It's history. On January 15, 1919, Boston's North End was struck by one of the strangest and deadliest disasters in American history, a flood of molasses. Today, we're going to dive deep into how this disaster unfolded, why a giant tank of syrup exploded, and what it left behind, from heartbreaking losses to lasting changes in the way we build our cities. Welcome to the channel, where we explore the wildest and most unbelievable moments in history. If you love stories where fact is stranger than fiction, hit subscribe and join me as we uncover this sticky tragedy. Let's rewind a few years. The story begins with a giant tank looming over Boston's North End. Built in 1915, it was no ordinary tank. It was a behemoth, 50 feet tall, 90 feet wide, and capable of holding over 2 million gallons of molasses. Just imagine standing in its shadow, a dark iron giant towering over homes, shops, and playgrounds. Why was so much molasses stored here? At the time, molasses wasn't just for cookies or candy. It was a key ingredient in industrial alcohol, used in everything from munitions during World War I to liquor. Business was booming, and the company behind the tank, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, wanted storage close to Boston Harbor for quick shipments. But from the very start, the tank had problems. People living nearby noticed that it leaked. Molasses oozed from the seams. Children would run up to it with cups and collect sweet drips as if the tank were a giant candy fountain. Neighbors complained about the smell and the mess. Workers reported hearing groans and creaks whenever the tank was filled. And yet, the company brushed it all off. Instead of fixing the problem properly, they painted the tank brown, not to strengthen it, but to disguise the leaks. Out of sight, out of mind. Have you ever seen a problem covered up with a cosmetic fix, even when danger was obvious? That's exactly what was happening here, and it would prove deadly. By January 1919, the war had ended, but the molasses business hadn't slowed down. Shipments kept coming in. Just days before the disaster, a massive delivery of warm molasses was pumped into the tank, mixing with older, colder molasses already inside. Now, if you've ever poured syrup onto pancakes, you know it flows slowly. But mix warm and cold syrup. Pressure builds, gases expand, and the tank walls strain. Engineers today believe this mix created powerful internal stresses, like shaking a soda bottle before popping the cap. On top of that, the steel plates used to build the tank were thinner than they should have been. The rivets holding it together were poorly installed. Worst of all, the tank had never been properly tested. No trial run with water, no engineer's stamp of approval. Just molasses poured in and shipped out. So here we had a massive, flawed tank in the middle of a busy immigrant neighborhood, full to the brim with sticky, pressurized liquid. Something was bound to happen. It was January 15th, 1919, just after lunchtime. The North End was lively, with children playing, workers on break, and horses pulling wagons along Commercial Street. The temperature had risen to the mid-40s, unusually warm for winter, and the molasses inside the tank was restless. At around 12:30 p.m., the tank gave way. First came a sound, Some said it was a deep rumble, like thunder or a train roaring by. Others heard rapid cracks like gunfire as rivets shot from the tank like bullets. Then, with a metallic shriek, the side of the tank split open. In seconds, 2.3 million gallons of molasses burst free. A wall of syrup, 15 to 25 feet high, moving at about 35 miles per hour, thundered down the street. Think about that. Faster than a person can run, heavier than cement, and stickier than glue. Buildings crumpled like matchsticks. The wave ripped homes from foundations, flattened the local firehouse, and twisted steel supports of the elevated train line. Horses were swept away instantly. Entire wagons disappeared, and people were swallowed. One child was seen lifted off the ground, carried by the wave, before vanishing under its surface. Adults were thrown against walls, trapped in debris, or dragged into the dark, suffocating mass. Imagine trying to run, but every step pulls you down like quicksand. Imagine gasping for air, but your mouth fills with sticky sweetness. Survivors later described it as drowning, only slower, heavier, more terrifying. The accounts from that day are unforgettable. One man said he felt the ground shake, then was knocked flat, pinned under debris. Another survivor recalled the air itself seemed sweet but hard to breathe, as though the molasses coated your lungs. Rescuers described victims glazed in syrup, almost unrecognizable, their clothes glued to their skin. Horses cried out before being smothered. And the noise, neighbors said it sounded like machine gun fire, followed by a roar. Then silence, broken only by screams and the crackling of collapsing buildings. In those first minutes, chaos reigned. Families searched frantically for children. Men tried to wade through the flood, but sank thigh-deep, stuck fast. And above it all, the sickly, sweet smell of molasses hung heavy in the winter air. As news spread, help rushed in. Navy sailors from a training ship nearby charged into the sticky mess to pull survivors out. Firefighters and police struggled against the molasses that clung to everything. Nurses set up makeshift hospitals in storefronts, trying to clean and treat victims coated in syrup. But the molasses was thickening as it cooled. By evening, it had hardened into something like tar. Rescuers had to hack through it with axes, fighting to free the living and recover the dead. The death toll was devastating. 21 people killed, over 150 injured. Entire families were shattered. Horses, wagons, and businesses were destroyed. And then came the cleanup. Crews pumped seawater from the harbor to wash the streets, scraped basements clean, shoveled hardened molasses into carts. The harbor itself turned brown. For weeks, people tracked sticky footprints onto subway platforms, into homes, even onto the seats of streetcars. For decades afterward, residents swore that on hot summer days, the North End still smelled faintly of molasses. Who was to blame? The company owning the tank immediately claimed sabotage. They pointed to anarchists, saying someone must have planted a bomb. After all, this was 1919. The Red Scare was in full swing, and bombings weren't unheard of. But locals didn't buy it. They had seen the leaks. They had heard the groans of the tank. They knew this was no act of sabotage. It was negligence. The courts agreed. Over 100 lawsuits were filed against the company. The case dragged on for years, with thousands of pages of testimony. Finally, in 1925, the verdict was clear. The tank had been poorly built, never tested, and ignored despite warnings. the company was liable. Victims and their families were awarded hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, millions in today's money. More importantly, the case helped change the law. From then on, engineers had to certify major structures. Building codes were tightened. Safety standards became stricter. The Molasses Flood, bizarre as it was, reshaped American engineering oversight. Today, if you walk through Boston's North End, you'll find a park where the tank once stood. Beneath the grass lies the old foundation, hidden but not forgotten. A plaque marks the spot, honoring those who lost their lives. The story remains chilling, partly because it's so unusual. Floods are expected from water, not syrup. But the Molasses Flood shows us that disaster doesn't always come in familiar forms. Sometimes it comes from the things we take for granted, the overlooked dangers sitting quietly in our neighborhoods. It also teaches us a lesson still relevant today. Profit and speed should never outweigh safety. The company rushed construction, cut corners, and dismissed warnings, and people paid the price. So, what can we learn from the Great Molasses Flood of 1919? That ignoring the small signs, a leak, a groan, a community's complaints, can lead to unimaginable catastrophe. That safety regulations are written in blood and loss, and that sometimes history's strangest disasters leave us with the most serious lessons. But here's something to think about. What molasses tanks exist today? What structures or systems do we trust, even though cracks are showing? Are we paying attention, or are we just painting over the leaks? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What surprised you most about this story? Do you think modern society is safer, or are we still ignoring warning signs in new forms? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's strangest tragedies, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories, and share this video with friends who love history's weirdest twists. This was the story of Boston's sticky disaster, the Great Molasses Flood. Until next time, keep uncovering the secrets of the past with us. Remember, the past is never really gone.